So in the program, there are different types of equatorial mounts, and I don't know if you can see this out there, but there's a red dot up on the screen. What we have in the room here is, and what we're going to demonstrate is a German equatorial mount. And in this photograph, this is a German equatorial mount. Here's one. Here's a GEM. Here's an equatorial mount, a German equatorial mount. These other, we have several of these. These are called wedge mounts, and we have a couple of mounts where the tripod and the wedge are integrated together as one piece, and that's called a wedge pod. Here's a mount that goes with the Meade ETX telescopes. It's a convertible. Okay, that plate is now in an equatorial position. When you use the telescope as equatorially, that plate can be laid flat, and then you can use the telescope in an alt-az mode. These wedge telescopes, some of them, not all of them, will lay down flat, so you can use them as an alt-az mount. In both these cases, these wedge, the telescope is on a fork. So the procedure to use the fork-based telescope in an equatorial mode is essentially the same as what we're going to talk about today with an equatorial mount. One blurb on the equatorial mount, it was developed in 1824 by a guy named Joseph von Fraunhofer for the great Dorpat, I probably mispronounced that, refractor that was being built. So that's something you can look up on Wikipedia if you want to find more about the background of the equatorial mount. Okay. You probably have seen this photograph out on the web somewhere. This is a time-exposed photograph of the night sky, and the Earth is rotating. And so over time, the stars will rotate around a central point up in the sky. And that central point is the North Celestial Pole. And our goal with setting up these equatorial mounts is to get the telescope tube, the axis of the telescope, to be aimed right at the center of this circle. Okay. I want to show you a video to kind of bring this point home a little bit better. There's no sound coming through, but that's okay. You see the Earth was rotating, the stars created trails, and what this picture is showing you is where that center point is located. Right in the center here, this little line here is actually the motion of the of Polaris, the North Star. So in the instruction manuals, they generally tell you to align the telescope to the North Star. That's not exactly the North Celestial Pole, but it's close to it. So it's, huh? Oh, okay. Okay. So as this slide depicts, we find the center, the North Celestial Pole, which is it's like 0.8 degrees off away from the North Star Polaris. To find Polaris, it sits between two recognizable patterns in the sky. You have on one side of it, you have the Big Dipper, and if you go to any outreach events, they always describe how to find the North Star by find the Big Dipper, look at the two stars in the bowl. They're called the pointer stars, and they point to Polaris. And it's roughly in line with, I guess, one of these stars over here on Cassiopeia. But Polaris sits, and of course, Polaris is the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. So if you can find these patterns in the sky, it makes it easier for you to find Polaris, and then you just hop, skip, and jump over to the North Celestial Pole. So what is an equatorial mount trying to do for you? Well, it's when it's aligned parallel when the polar axis of the scope is aligned with the axis of the Earth, then it'll counterbalance the rotation of the Earth as you're trying to track the object. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I just wanted to. We have a globe here. I'm sure that everyone's familiar with the globe from elementary school, but the globe, the axis of the Earth from the North Pole to the South Pole. We're trying to get the telescope parallel, the tube of the telescope parallel with this axis. Okay, and so we're actually sitting up here somewhere in North Carolina. So here's North Carolina. We're over in here somewhere in the United States. And if we were on the equator, then we could set the telescope up, horizontally to the Earth, and it would be pointed north. But we're not at the equator. We're at a certain angle away from the North Celestial Pole. So we have to do something to the telescope to get it aligned parallel with the Earth's axis. If you have any questions, just pipe in. Or if you have any additional information to add, just pipe in. So here's another diagram of what we're trying to do. So we have the Earth's axis underneath us somewhere at our location. Then we have the axis, what's called the polar axis of the telescope itself. So we're trying to get these two lines parallel with each other. And this is a diagram that you'll see it's very common. You'll see in many user manuals. And I've just pulled these diagrams from the user manual for this particular scope.
And here in North Carolina, Rob, we have to make that angle 35.78 degrees, more or less.
Yeah, one of the steps that we're going to go through is you need to figure out what your latitude is of the observing site that you're sitting at. And that's the angle you're going to use to set up this, to make the telescope parallel with the Earth. So we're going to show you how to do that in a second. So we're going to we've broken down the steps of setting this up through different phases here. And it's basically, there are steps to go through to assemble the scope. There are steps to go through to align the scope. And there are steps to go through to actually use the scope. And so most people that have come through the loaner scope program, and then they bring the scope back and they share their experience, and they pretty much just say, well, yeah, I got it all assembled and I just kind of moved it around and I found my thing up there. So they didn't really, it's another leap to take real advantage of what the equatorial telescope can do for you if you can get it aligned properly. So we're gonna go through that.
And that's what we're going to do.
And that's what we're going to do.
You're going to tell me to start, right?
I'm going to tell you to start. So the first step is to assemble the tripod. So you're going to you've got all your gear out at your observation site. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set up the tripod itself. This particular telescope, the tripod and the mount are separate. This particular telescope, the tripod and the mount are together or integrated, But that's the difference between a or a $150 telescope and a $650 telescope. So, so Frank is going to take it from here. He's going to first extend the tripod legs.
Right, and we have done this before, so we know that I shouldn't extend these legs too high because otherwise it puts the eyepiece out of my reach. But, you know, at first you don't know exactly how high you need it to be. It's a lot easier if this is light enough for you to put it down on the ground. And I'm going to bring this out about 4 inches because Rob and I tried various heights and 4 inches was about good enough. And right from the beginning, you might be wondering, do I have to get it exactly 4 inches? Why isn't Frank using a ruler? And I admit I'm cheating a little bit because, you know, I've done this a few times. A ruler would be handy. Sometimes you don't want to be so precise because you're actually going to put this on a lawn and the lawn isn't really going to be even. And we're going to come to that part in just a minute, how to level up your tripod. And then I'm going to extend it. And something I'm going to show those of you in the audience, you see there's an N on this leg. So this particular tripod, they've sort of predetermined how they want you to set it up. Not all German equatorial mounts are that specific. But this one, you see this bar here, that's going to be really important. You're going to see why in a few minutes. And I also took a compass a little earlier, and I'm just going to do what we call roughing in. So I'm looking at this compass and I'm turning the legs around until this is more or less pointing north. Okay, now leveling. Got this nice bubble level right here. Gonna put it up there. You know what? That's not quite good enough. So it looks like maybe the easiest thing to do is to actually lower one leg rather than raise 2. And sure enough, that did the trick. And that, folks, is a matter of practice. Sometimes you're going to have to adjust 2 rather than just 1. But this is centered enough for a good start. So remember these 2 tools, a bubble level of one sort or another, and a compass. Of course, you can get your compass on your phone these days. You can get a bubble level on your phone, but sometimes it's handy to have, you know, mechanical gizmos around.
The easy levelers that you can put on the top there, you can adjust. They have 3 axes you can adjust with everything on, so you don't have to adjust the actual tripod.
Could you say more about that?
Sure. I got one I started off with a C-Star, the S50. And I mean, leveling those are pretty important. And the tripod is tiny. It's really hard to adjust. So there's a little piece that they sell. High Point Scientific sells one. And I think they have it on Amazon too. It's called an easy leveler. And you attach it on top of the tripod. You know, the bolt goes into the bottom like you would where the telescope would go or the mount. And then you attach the mount to the leveler, and it's got 3 axes with a level on it. So you just turn a little wheel to adjust the mount instead of having to adjust the actual legs of the tripod. So you can put the legs wherever you want and then make fine adjustments on the easy leveler that sits on top. It's like $30, I think, maybe on Amazon. Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic, especially in the dark, you know, when you're trying to be light conscious and stuff. Those little levels are really nice.
Right. And tell the audience again where you can buy that.
I know they have it on High Point Scientific and and Amazon also. And I think on like Etsy, people sell like handmade ones, but it's like $20, $30 at the most.
Okay. You heard it here. And we are not getting any money back from Amazon or High Point Scientific.
Neither high.
Okay.
Okay. Next step is marking your tripod. If you're going to continue to use the same observing site, it makes it the next time you set up your telescope, you can skip a lot of these steps by just simply marking your tripod on the ground, as you see in this photograph.
If you look at the photograph on the left, you might see 3 dots on the sidewalk. And they're for me to just plot my tripod legs around so that they're aligned with the North Celestial Pole.
Yeah, you've got, so, you know, you spent time extending your legs, you know, and balancing the telescope. If you just leave it the way it is, next time you set it up, it should be good to go.
And in my backyard, I've got a pier permanently installed. And right now it's all set up pointing to the North Celestial Pole. And it's very hard to see in this photograph. But if you're looking at the fence post in the distance, there's a plumb bob right next to it. And that plumb bob is actually in the direction of the North Celestial Pole. So if I put you know, if something comes up and, you know, I'm just sort of saying things aren't tracking that well, they're a little bit off, and I need to adjust whatever mount I have up there, because I can put 4 or 5 different ones, because I have different plates to mount on the top of the pier, then I can tweak the mount a little bit and get it trued up.
Okay, next phase is to assemble the mount. And this includes the counterweights that come with the telescope. There'll need to be some tweaking when he attaches the mount to the mount. Also needs to be pointed north, and this is where we'll set the latitude of the observing location.
Yep.
This is where we're going to make the telescope parallel with the Earth.
So I mentioned that this mount is unique, not unique in terms of like every other mount, but compared to some gems. This post that sticks up is related to audience, this fine adjustment here. So you see, you've got this gap. You've got these 2 knobs. You can do some fine adjusting. And so you want to place it this way. And then I am going to tighten this up. And then I'm tightening up the spreader, making sure all of this is right. And I'm not really doing anything with the fine adjustment yet.
And having had some frustration with the equatorials is once you establish the tripod, don't move it at all. Because there's always an urge as you fuddle with it and try to find something to pick it up and move it.
Right. Spend more time at the front end getting it as right as possible rather than tweaking it afterwards. And usually the tweaking afterwards occurs when you actually have the telescope on it already, and then, you know, you have to, you know, basically for safety's sake, take the telescope off because it's top heavy at that point. All right. So the next step here is we already positioned this roughly north. And now I'm adding the counterweight bar.
Oh, yeah, I don't see why not. Yeah, sure. Just need the name, phone number, and email.
And I'm going to take off the counterweight safety nut. And, depending upon how you feel about it, some people put the counterweights, they put them all the way up to the top. Some people put them in the middle. Most people do not put them all the way at the end. If you are assembling your scope for the first time, you don't necessarily know what are the ideal settings. And I don't know about any of you here in attendance, but I have never come across a manual that said, you know what, if you just have your telescope and you should put your counterweights about in the middle of the bar. I haven't seen a single one, and I've been looking at telescope manuals since 1967. And you'd think that that would be a relatively simple thing to do, but they don't tell you. So something that's sort of average, so it's easy to drop it down or lift it up. And put your safety nut back on. Nothing like dropping 5 pounds of metal on your foot. And I'm going to turn this around here so that those of you who are a little bit maybe the audience can see this a little bit better. Not you, sir, unfortunately. But I've got the knobs so that they are not on top of each other because it'll be a little easier to adjust later on. Okay. Finally, and this is something that's going to be a little bit harder. I'm gonna actually move the camera. So I don't know what it's like there for you people who are out in Zoom land, but hopefully you can see what's going on here. What do you say? Can they see it? It's perfect. All right. The reason I did that is because this side, the side you can't see anymore, does not have the altitude adjustment. Now, there are many, many different ways that the different kind of gem mounts have different kind of locking mechanisms so you can adjust the altitude. This one is fairly common. It has 2 opposing screws. And in this case, as I do this, it is slowly decreasing the elevation. And if I turn it back the other way, it increases the elevation. And you can think of this other screw here as a way to lock the whole gizmo in place. And then no shake, no shimmy, right? Okay, so we've done your basic setup now. We've got it set for, and these dials are not super fine. So looks like I've got it a little bit more like 34. So I'm just going to like adjust this a little bit more and tweak it like that. All right. Here we go. I'm also going to, these fine tuning knobs, I'm going to turn them in and I'm just putting them, I'm not really locking them in because that's going to allow me to shift the mount by 1/2 degree one way or the other to get it fine-tuned to the North Celestial Pole.
Okay.
Where do I find the table that tells you the correct altitude?
We're here.
Well, for any, say, I decided to move from here to New York. Obviously,
Right.
that's going to be different under a different
Yep.
latitude.
It's in your hand, right? If you typed in something in Google and said, what is my latitude and longitude? It'll tell you right away. And
So I said,
your latitude will be exactly. Yeah, right? And that's why when Rob was talking about being at the equator, you basically set up an equatorial mount just like it's an alta azimuth mount, because the degree is 90 degrees, right? Or more exactly, it's 0 degrees. I got that backwards. It's 0 degrees.
My
Right.
question was that indicator dial is actually a latitude scale. So
Exactly.
if I'm at 33, whatever minutes, seconds, I set it to 33 and
And you're
try
good.
to get it closer. If I'm 33:59, then I might want to set to 34.
Mhm.
It's not going to be that fine of an adjustment.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Rob to hold the camera tripod and track me. For safety's sake, we've had the telescope tube on the floor underneath a small table. And I'm just picking it up. It's not too heavy. Don't do this. There's a temptation to carry it like that. I'm a former fine arts professional, and we never trusted hanging anything in any way whatsoever. And I have seen people, they forgot to tighten up their nuts, and whoop, goodbye telescope. All right. So now we are putting the telescope mount here. And there we go. And there is a tightening nut over on this side. And I'm firming it up. And there is a much smaller nut, which acts as kind of an extra margin of safety. And now we've got our basic telescope set up. Over here, we have our slow motion controls. And I'm going to attach them. And this is a nice mount in another way. You could attach your slow motion control on one side or the other of this axis. And I'm going to do that here with the short one. And there's some notches. And I'm just tightening it up a little bit. And then, all right, going to do this over here.
You could put that on either side.
Hmm?
You could attach it
I'm going to attach it on either side, right? So lefty, righty, parity. And I don't mean parody, I mean parity, right? And that's kind of nice. And, you know, sometimes, actually I prefer to do the fine adjustment before I put the telescope tube on, but I'm just following the instructions. There we go. And there you go. All right, everything's looking smooth. Just one more slight twist. All right.
So, question: is there a reason why the fine tuning knob is for the right ascension is positioned the way you put it?
Completely random at this point. Why random? Well, I don't exactly know how it's going to work. I'm doing this as if, it's out of the box. It's new to me. I don't know what's the most ergonomic design. And that relates to, how high up the counterweight should be and a number of other things. We've done a run through, but the miracle of like experimenting with what's best is what you're going to be doing, the first 10, 15 times you're out there. Hopefully in better weather than we're having right now, so you can tolerate a little fiddling around with it. Next, we're going to install the finder scope. So this is a straight through finder scope. Doesn't have a diagonal. Sometimes a diagonal is a good thing, sometimes it's less good. And just locking that into place. All right. Okie doke. So, and then to quickly slew the scope, there are two lock knobs, for one for each axis. And this is going to allow me to move the telescope around and around. But what I'm most concerned about is, do I have a rough adjustment for looking at the North Celestial Pole? So I moved it. I know from my setup here that my telescope is roughly pointed in the right direction. And now you see how about the height of the scope. If I'd extended the legs a lot higher as a 5'6" person, the focuser might be a little bit out of my range. And even now, I'm still having to adjust it. Now we're doing it this way. You know, some people want to balance the telescope first. There's a little bit of variety here. Okay. And actually what I would probably do is I would carefully put this knob in my pocket, excuse me, this eyepiece cover in my pocket, right? Knobs, eyepiece covers, you name it. And I would look, and there's a nice crosshair here, pretty good quality crosshair. And you notice that this is a pretty reasonable height for me. And hopefully at this point, I would see a bright star that I would go, definitely, it's Polaris. Now, if I'm not seeing it, well, you know, that's a little tricky. What do I have to do next? Right? So I might want to adjust it, but hopefully it would be there. And you know, one of the nice things is that if you're already pointed in the right direction and you tweak your telescope a little bit one way or the other, the fact of the matter is you will never, ever get Polaris really easily into the center of your finder scope unless you've really got your axes set up right to begin with. All right. And you'll notice, by the way, there was a question about where the knobs are. Right now, this knob is pointing that way. This knob is pointing this way. And I assumed the position and I could tweak it. So they didn't stay inconveniently paired together. All right. I'm now taking the eyepiece cover off of the focuser tube, carefully sticking it in my pocket. And all right. What does Rob mean by a low power eyepiece? Well, 20 to maybe 32 millimeters. That's fine. Could you put a, you know, one that's 40 millimeters or something like that? Sure. One of the tricks there, though, is you're going to have a fairly heavy eyepiece. And if you keep it in the 20 to 32 millimeter range, you can go down without having to make too many adjustments, and you can go up by so you won't have to make too many adjustments. But if you put something really heavy to start off with or something really light, then you'll end up tweaking some of the parameters to get it balanced. Okay. We're on to the next step, Rob.
Okay, next step. This is a step you might want to do every time you set up. It's just to do a quick check on your mirror collimation. And most telescopes will come with what's called a collimation cap. It's a very simple tool to check to see if your secondary and your primary mirrors are lined up. This is a reflector telescope. It has two mirrors The primary is in the rear of the telescope. The secondary is up close to the eyepiece. So you want these two mirrors to be aligned up so that you can get a clear picture of the object that you're observing. And this photograph here on the screen is, you'll see this in many user manuals. When you look through this collimation cap has a little hole in it. It's like a cover over the eyepiece holder. You just look through the hole and then look at these various images that you see up here on the screen until you get to the image in the lower, where you want is the image in the lower right-hand corner, and that, or the bottom two images. And that tells you that you're good to go for the evening. Otherwise, if you want to spend the time, it's probably a good time to check this collimations even before you go out. But the top two images will let you know whether the secondary mirror close to the eyepiece needs to be adjusted or if the primary mirror needs to be adjusted.
So just for a moment, would you hold the camera so people can see what I'm doing? So he's just saying, basically, you put the cap in here, right? And then you look through it, and it's centered enough for our work today. And that's partially because we have to joke around. Take off the cover first. Well, we are off a little bit. Probably the telescope got jostled and it's off a smidgen. We're not going to do collimation today. We will get back to that. Thank you.
Yeah. On the club YouTube channel, there is a video of a class that Naveen Malik put together about collimation that you can review. But this is just a simple check of your collimation. If it's way out of tune, the club does have tools. I mean, there's some sophisticated laser type tools that actually you can really get your alignment very, very accurate.
I will say that what I looked at was not as bad as the secondary mirror needs adjustment illustration or the primary mirror needs adjustment. As a matter of fact, if I was in a rush, I might just live with it and see what happened. But it probably needs about a quarter turn crank on one or two knobs in the back of the primary mirror.
Show the knobs back here. Those are the knobs, 3 knobs for adjusting the primary mirror. And then through the top, there are some screws for adjusting the secondary mirror. But we won't be covering these topics today.
So on to balancing.
Okay. Next step is to balance the telescope. This is where the big weights come in to play.
Right. So again, putting a low power, moderate weight eyepiece in. And then what I want to do is very carefully control the scope. Some people hold on to different parts. I tend to hold on to the back end. Do not hold on to the finder stem. Some people actually grasp their focuser. You know, if you were doing it, if I was doing it, I might do it this way. And no, not balanced. Okay. So lock it back up. You're a beginner. You don't know which way the counterweight should go. Should they go further out? Should they go up? I'm going to put this one up just as an experiment, see what happens. Still off. Maybe I should be going the other way. Now what happens? Again, holding on to the optical tube. Still not balanced. And remember, there's a lot of weight torquing on this side of the scope. And that might be something that needs to be corrected. So trying to get the center of gravity on the scope more lined up. And this is perhaps one reason why, people have an affinity for Dobsonian or yoke-mounted scopes, is that this matter of like which side your scope is on maybe is not always as mission critical. Looking good. A little bit.
My telescope is not properly balanced.
What is that?
What will happen if my telescope is not properly balanced?
Well, if it's minorly imbalanced, really nothing.
Just inconvenience of moving
Yeah.
around, is it gonna actually make a difference?
Well, this is why I suggest doing a lot of this practice work during the daytime in the comfort of your living room where you can figure it out. In some cases, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. In other cases, you've got it so unbalanced that if you don't pay attention, something is going to smack you in the face.
Yeah.
Right? The way it was to begin with before I adjusted the counterweights, not really a good idea.
Now if it's tracking something.
Yeah.
In
Can I-
this case, it isn't really gonna make any difference. You're not gonna put any strain or stress on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even like amount that has tracking, if you create too much torque, you are going to wear mechanically the gears. You can have shear, burn up the motor. Right.
With this, it doesn't really matter, other than it's just gonna be unwieldy, it's gonna be difficult to move around. Just best practice, get it balanced.
Okay.
Well, can I add to that? What you'll discover is once you've been moving the telescope around and you have it on an object and you just let go, you don't want the telescope to drift away by itself. You want the scope to lock in, and with a balanced scope, it should lock in there. And then the only way to move off that object is with your tuning knobs. If it's not balanced, it'll sort of, drift away.
Okay. And while we were having that discussion, which was really important and definitely useful, is you'll notice that the telescope tube is just sticking where I put it, right? So probably if I had it backed up too far, if I had it out this far, it would slew around all by itself. But here it is, it's just sort of nicely staying in place. Can you get it more precise? Sure. Is it necessary? Probably not. You're going to be changing eyepieces. You're going to be changing positions. You're going to be loosening up the scope rings so you can bring your focuser back at a more convenient height. So many things. You just want to have a good rough in.
Okay. Next step. We want to align the finder scope. So you basically have two telescopes now mounted on this rig. You have the finder scope at the top, and you have the telescope itself underneath it. And you want these two sitting together in parallel.
Mm-hmm. Right. In a perfect world, your finder scope didn't get jostled very much. And when you look through it, and then you look through your eyepiece, you go, identical image. But, the fact of the matter is that that's not always the case. And really what you want to do is you want to adjust your finder scope, because you can't really adjust your OTA. It is what it is. You just want to adjust the finder scope so that you get it lined up. And again, daytime work is just so much easier than getting out in the field, or get out in the field early enough to see something bright. you got some bright objects tonight. You've got Venus, you've got Saturn, you've got Jupiter. Venus is a good start to your observing day because as soon as the sun is drifting down towards the horizon, if you know where to look, you can actually see Venus before the sun goes below the horizon. And that would be much lower and in a different point of view. So this is actually pointing towards the North Star. And here it is, it's the middle of the day. Does anybody know where Venus is right now? No. So if you remember that Venus never gets really any further than 46 degrees from the sun. The sun is over here, right? North is that way, south is that way. The sun, which we cannot see in this room, is this way. And that is east. And I imagine roughly 46 degrees. It isn't like at 46 degrees now. It's more like 30 something. And before I take out my stellarium or whatever, I could turn the telescope to this point, raise it up a little bit, lock it in place. Hello. Lost one of my locking knobs. Somebody help me. There it is. Okay. There we go. And that's one of the nice things. I didn't have to turn this telescope around. If I had like a typical alto-azimuth mount, I might have had to do some sort of rotational. The very oldest kind of like alto-azimuth mounts, they're like a yoke. And you know, you have to do all sorts of shifting or not. And here we go. Right? During the daytime, I could see Venus if I wanted. People don't always know that you can still see planets, bright planets during the day, but you can. And we're still aligning the finder scope. So let's say it's more like it's night. Okay, it's more like it's night. And Venus would be over in that direction. And I would have adjusted the telescope. For time purposes, I'm not going to do all that. And I look in here, on my tippy toes, and it's a little off. And this kind of finder scope has a little adjustment knob over here that has a spring in it. And it has two adjustment knobs that do not. And you can't see it happening, but basically I'm turning the finder in that direction. Because when I looked at it, Venus was in the center, and it was this direction in your eyeball. But remember, this is a simple straight through finder scope. So things are reversed and upside down. And if you don't know which it is, just tweak the knobs and you will see that you can bring your crosshairs into alignment. Okay.
So now with the finder scope aligned, whatever you see in the finder scope, you should also see in the center of the eyepiece, right?
Absolutely.
That's the plan. Okay, next step. This is we want to now align the axis of the telescope with the axis of the Earth.
Which we already have roughed in.
Yeah.
We did a lot of that work and it looked probably easy peasy. And there would be an absolutely important reason to just double check and getting it more centered up. Again, I'd be looking through the finder scope, looking for Polaris. I'd find it. I'd check it's in. That's great. Some telescope, some gem mounts actually have a small finder scope built in to the axis. Here's one from another telescope, and it is really just a small finder scope. I hope you can see the shininess of the front lens. And here is the eyepiece side, and it would literally fit up inside here. And even if you don't have that, you can take off the caps. And in this case, you can look up through the hole and see whether it's lined up. And let's say I saw that it was just a little bit off. I mentioned that this particular CG4 mount, you have some fine adjustments here. And I could, seeing that it needs to go over to the left, I would loosen this up and I would turn, I would loosen up the one at the right and turn the one on the left. I got my right and left mixed up. I'm so prone to that. But can you see that, Rob, where it's moving slightly? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And that allows me to do a little bit more of a fine adjustment.
Okay.
And that's an image of what we're actually looking at right now
This is
in
what you see.
fiction.
This is what you see through the polar alignment scope. And we could pass this one around if people wanted to take a look at it. But you see, the image in the scope matches what should be up in the sky on either side of Polaris. So when you have the polar, do you want to explain how that works? How you actually would align the image through the scope with the image in the sky?
I thought I just did that, Rob.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, with the polar alignment scope, you have to move the axis of the scope so that the Cassiopeia and Big Dipper are aligned on with the images that are actually in the sky, and then you tweak the fine tune so that you see Polaris in the center of your eyepiece.
I probably misspoke. Could I add this? So if you have one of the better kinds of polar finder scopes, it actually has a circle in it. And what you do is you put Polaris on the perimeter of the circle, and then in the center is where the true north celestial pole will be. Did I get that right this time, Rob?
I think so.
Okay.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, so here's just another set of steps that Frank has just described on if your scope does come with a polar alignment scope, then you'll follow similar steps when you try to align it with eyesight. It's just that there's one step that you'll need to rotate the polar axis of the scope to get the images in the finder scope aligned with the images on the sky in the sky, or the patterns in the sky. So now the scope is ready to actually be used. Now, that's a lot of steps. Oh man, I got to do that every time I set up the scope. Well, right now, if you're going to be observing at the same site, in the future, as long as you got your 3 dots on the ground, all you really have to do, and don't change any of your settings, you should be able to just take your scope out of your house, put it on the 3 dots, and you're good to go.
Everybody after a while gets an intuitive knowledge of where their scope is hanging out. They get an intuitive knowledge of where this Vixen bar should be. They get an intuitive knowledge of where their telescope rings should be, the angle at which they want their scope to make it convenient for their height. Before that, I used to use little dabs of painter's tape until I got used to where my setup was. Right? Painter's tape, it's usually not going to, it's low tack, so it really won't mess up any of your nice finish. And that's certainly a way to do it, right? Make things as easy as possible on yourself. Once you get it set up, that setup is basically the same. Why would it change? Well, there could be a couple of reasons. You can see this knob here. Can they see me pointing at this knob? right? You might attach another scope back here. You might attach a camera for some reason. You might get a really expensive eyepiece that weighs 2 pounds. You might change out your finder scope for a larger right angle finder scope. Things that change the weight, change some of your adjustments. And you just want to account for that. Again, do yourself a favor, do a run through during the daytime. That being said, that's mostly about balancing the mount. It's not about the orientation of the axes. It's not about keeping this tight. Earlier we had a question about like the longitude and latitude. Well, you know, your altitude is not really needing fine tuning. If you were to go from here to Columbia, South Carolina, yes, you're gonna want to change your altitude. If you go from here to Richmond, yes, you're going to want to change your altitude. Going from here on the North Carolina State University campus at Dorothea Dix Park, and if you go, north to one of our observing areas, or go west to Jordan Lake, or go east to another observing area that is down I-95, yeah, not a big deal. You can just more or less keep everything the same except finding where is your true north.
Okay. So at this point, just with practice and patience on moving the telescope around, it's a little bit different from moving a telescope around that's on an alt-az mount, which is very intuitive. Think of a camera tripod, up, down, right, left. Where here you're moving based on the rotation of the Earth. So if you wanted to try to find Venus, I think we were going to try and find Venus in here today, just to demonstrate how you would move this scope around.
Right. We'll get a redo. So right now, by the way, Jupiter is over that way, below the Earth's horizon. It won't come up for another 3 hours. Venus is over here somewhere. Where's Saturn? Saturn's between Venus and Jupiter. Okay, some of the audience are nodding their heads, so Saturn's over that way. Still going to go back to Venus. Again, unlock the axis knobs. I'll caution everybody, do not look at the sun unless you have proper equipment, right? You have either a white light filter that covers the entire front of your in this case, your optical tube, because the mirror is down here, or if you have a refractor, you still want a white light filter up there. And of course, there are some of us who have hydrogen alpha telescopes, and those have very special filters built into them to protect your eyes. And again, just going like this, the sun is over that way, and just locking it in place again.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're coming up on the hour. We're at 50, almost 55 minutes. So, okay. Anything more you want to add?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to our next demo where we'll go over setting circles and using planispheres and a number of other ways to, and using Stellarium and other apps so that you can increase your enjoyment and prepare yourself for a night of fun and excitement. TBA,
Yeah.
but no later than April,
Right. Exactly.
right? But sooner rather than April.
Okay. Yeah. In closing, here are some references. I think we make these slides available to the people who attended. But this presentation, we benefited from a lot of the information off of some videos and probably mostly from the usual manual for this particular telescope. And with that, thank you very much from both Frank and myself.